A racist cop picked the wrong black man to harass, because this time his target had a Secret Service detail watching. Before we dive in, let's do a quick check. If you support justice, comment 1 and hit that subscribe button. If you don't, well, at least smash that like button. And trust me, stick around till the end. There's a twist you won't see coming. The gas station sat on the outskirts of Richmond, Virginia, its flickering neon sign barely cutting through the thick midnight air. Marcus Carter had been driving for hours, the open road a welcome escape from the stress of his work. He wasn't in a rush. He pulled his sleek black sedan into an empty pump, stretching his shoulders before grabbing the nozzle. But just as he started fueling, the reflection of flashing red and blue lights glowed in his rear windshield. A police cruiser rolled in slowly, crawling to a stop a few yards away. Marcus exhaled. He'd seen this before, too many times. Patrol cars did their rounds, sure, but something about this felt different. The cop wasn't moving, just watching, waiting. Then the door swung open and a young officer stepped out, adjusting his belt, his hand hovering near his baton like he was expecting a fight. "Evening," the cop said, voice laced with authority. "Mind telling me what you're doing here?" Marcus barely turned. "Getting gas." His voice was steady, but the officer's eyes narrowed like he didn't like that answer. "This your car?" Marcus glanced at his own vehicle. "Yeah." "Need to see some ID." A slow breath. He knew where this was headed. "Is there a reason for that?" The cop's jaw tightened. "You're acting suspicious." Suspicious? For pumping gas? Marcus felt his pulse hammer, anger rising, but he stayed still. He knew exactly what kind of man he was dealing with. Marcus Carter clenched his jaw, forcing himself to keep his expression unreadable. He'd been here before, this little game of authority, this unspoken challenge. He'd played it too many times, and he knew the rules. One wrong word, one sudden movement, and the situation could spiral. The cop squared his stance, feet planted wide, chest puffed slightly. "It's late," he continued, his voice dripping with suspicion. "You're out here dressed like that. Doesn't fit the area." Marcus let out a slow breath through his nose. There it was. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not in his tailored navy suit. Not in his polished shoes. Not in this sleek car that, in the officer's mind, didn't belong to a black man at a gas station past midnight. "So what exactly would fit the area?" Marcus asked, his voice calm, controlled. The cop ignored the question. Instead, he took another step closer. "Hand over your ID." Marcus didn't move. "Am I being detained?" The officer's lips curled in irritation, his fingers twitching near his baton. "I asked you for ID." "And I asked if I'm being detained." Marcus shot back, his voice sharp now, eyes locked onto the officer's. The cop's face hardened. He wasn't used to being questioned. He wasn't used to not being in control. The air between them thickened, heavy with unspoken tension. Marcus could hear the quiet rustle of movement behind him. A man at the far end of the lot adjusting his side mirror, pretending not to watch. A woman inside the gas station, halfway through refilling her soda, had frozen near the counter. The gas station attendant, an older man with tired eyes, was glancing nervously between them. "Step away from the vehicle," the officer ordered, his voice edged with warning. Marcus exhaled. He could argue, push back, demand an actual reason, but he knew how quickly these things could escalate. Then the cop smirked. "Got drugs in the car?" Marcus blinked. "What?" "You heard me," the cop sneered. "What's in the trunk?" "You have no probable cause," Marcus said evenly. "That's so." The officer's fingers curled around his baton. For a split second, Marcus saw it. The shift in his eyes. That dangerous flicker. This cop wasn't just trying to assert control. He wanted a reaction. He was searching for a reason to escalate, to turn this into something more. The gas pump clicked, signaling a full tank, but neither of them moved. Then the officer's voice came low and cold. "Step. Away. From the vehicle." Marcus stood his ground. The officer's grip on his baton tightened. The air was razor-sharp now, an invisible line drawn between them. Marcus could feel it, the moment before something snapped. He was unarmed, outnumbered, and he knew exactly where this was heading. Then the distant roar of approaching engines shattered the silence. Headlights washed over the station. The ground trembled ever so slightly. And just like that, the power in the air shifted. The low growl of engines sent a ripple through the tension-choked air. Bright headlights slashed across the pavement, casting long, predatory shadows. The officer flinched, just for a second, but Marcus saw it. That tiny fracture in his confidence. That fleeting moment where he realized something was off. 3 black SUVs rolled in like silent predators, their tinted windows concealing whoever sat inside. But Marcus didn't need to see them to know. He felt the shift. This wasn't random, this wasn't coincidence. The officer, still gripping his baton, straightened, squaring his shoulders like he could intimidate the unknown. "Who the hell is that?" he muttered, eyes darting between Marcus and the approaching vehicles. Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. The SUVs came to a slow, deliberate stop near the gas pumps. The air thickened. A stillness fell over the lot as if the entire world was holding its breath. Then the doors opened. The first man stepped out with the kind of presence that didn't need an introduction. Tall, salt-and-pepper hair, dressed in a suit that screamed authority. His movements were smooth, controlled, not a wasted motion. The kind of man who didn't walk into a situation, he entered it. Behind him, 2 more men followed, equally sharp, equally composed, their gazes scanning the scene with quiet precision. They weren't just here. They were here for a reason. And the officer? He knew it too. His fingers flexed around the baton, but he didn't lift it. His stance shifted, not quite defensive, but no longer aggressive. He was assessing, recalculating. For the first time since this started, he wasn't in control. The first man ignored the cop entirely, his sharp eyes locked onto Marcus. "Sir," he said, voice smooth, professional. "Are you all right?" He didn't ask Marcus what happened. He didn't ask for an explanation. That wasn't necessary. The cop blinked, caught off guard by the dismissal. "Hey!" he barked, trying to reclaim the authority slipping through his fingers. "Somebody want to tell me what the hell is going on?" No one answered him. Instead, the 2 other men from the SUVs positioned themselves near Marcus's car, their body language clear. They weren't security guards. They weren't just some rich guy's muscle. They were something else entirely. The cop swallowed. His confidence wavered. He had walked into something bigger than he could comprehend. Marcus met his gaze now, his expression unreadable. "I was just explaining my rights to him," he said evenly. The words landed like a punch to the gut. The cop's jaw tightened. His baton, once an unspoken threat, now felt useless in his grip. One of the suited men pulled something from his pocket. A badge. The cop barely had time to process it before the first man spoke again. "Secret Service." 2 words. That was all it took. The cop's entire posture changed. The realization hit him like a freight train. His eyes flickered between Marcus and the agents, piecing it together. Marcus wasn't just some guy at a gas station, and suddenly, everything he thought he had control over was gone. Silence hung thick in the air, pressing down on the gas station like a storm about to break. Officer Grant stood frozen, the weight of those 2 words, Secret Service, hitting him like a gut punch. His mouth went dry. His grip on the baton loosened, fingers twitching as if his body was catching up to the reality his brain was still processing. The lead agent, the man with the salt and pepper hair, finally turned to him, his expression unreadable, calm in a way that made Grant's pulse stutter. "Officer," he said, voice sharp as a blade, "do you have a reason for detaining Mr. Carter?" Mr. Carter, not sir, not man, not suspect. It was deliberate, intentional. A reminder that Marcus Carter wasn't just some random guy in a gas station parking lot. He was someone protected, someone powerful. Grant's jaw clenched. He scrambled for footing, for something to ground himself. He was acting suspicious, he stammered, cursing himself for how weak it sounded. The agent tilted his head slightly. Suspicious how? Grant felt heat crawl up the back of his neck. His excuses, so easy to throw around minutes ago, felt flimsy under the agent's gaze. He swallowed hard. I asked for ID and he refused. The agent didn't blink. Is that a crime? Grant's stomach twisted. His instincts screamed at him to assert control, to push back, but he couldn't. Not here. Not now. The two other agents were still standing near Marcus's car, unreadable, their presence alone enough to make Grant feel completely outmatched. One of them pulled out a phone, tapping the screen. Grant saw the movement and took an automatic step back. What? What are you doing? The agent sighed, barely disguising his impatience. We have this entire interaction recorded. He gestured toward the gas station. Dash cams, witnesses, store security cameras. Would you like to continue explaining your justification for harassment, Officer Grant? Grant's pulse pounded in his ears. The gas station was completely silent. He could feel eyes on him. The woman at the window, the man in the car, the attendant behind the counter. Everyone had seen. Everyone knew. His mind raced. He had to salvage this. I didn't know who he was, he tried. Marcus, standing motionless until now, let out a breath, sharp, humorless. He shook his head, his voice low but razor-sharp. That's the problem. The words cut deeper than any shouted argument, because they were true. Grant's face burned. His fingers twitched at his sides, but he had no weapon left. No badge, no authority, no excuse. The power he thought he held had slipped right through his fingers, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it. The weight of Marcus's words settled over the gas station like a crushing force. That's the problem. Officer Grant's breath hitched, his pulse hammering so hard he could feel it in his skull. Every instinct told him to fight back, to reassert his control, to remind them that he was the one with the badge, the authority. But standing there under the cold, unwavering stares of the Secret Service agents, he knew. He had already lost. One of the agents, still eerily calm, glanced down at his watch before speaking. Mr. Carter, he said, his tone professional, almost bored. Would you like to press charges? The words sent a chill straight down Grant's spine. Press charges. He barely stopped himself from stepping back. He knew what that meant, an official investigation, a suspension, possibly worse. His badge felt heavier on his chest. The baton at his side, once a silent promise of power, now felt like dead weight. Grant swallowed hard, his throat working around words he couldn't form. He could feel sweat forming at his temples, his uniform sticking to his skin. His mind raced for an escape. He could apologize. He could say it was all a misunderstanding. But the truth, the undeniable, glaring truth, was that this moment wasn't about misunderstanding. It was about accountability. He could feel their eyes on him. The agents, Marcus, the witnesses inside the store. The man still sitting in his car at the far end of the lot. No one was pretending anymore. No one was looking away. They all saw. Marcus studied him now, really looking at him, not with anger, not even with satisfaction. Just a quiet, weighted assessment, like he was peeling back every layer of Grant's authority and seeing the man beneath it. The same man who, minutes ago, had demanded respect without offering any in return. Grant's jaw tightened. He stopped himself. What could he say? Marcus exhaled sharply, shaking his head just slightly. You don't get to do this, he said, voice measured, controlled. Not to me. Not to anyone. The words cut deeper than any threat, because there was no bravado in them, no posturing, just truth, and truth was lethal. One of the agents pulled something from his pocket, a small device, maybe a recorder. We have everything, he said simply. Dash cams, security footage, witness statements. This doesn't just go away. Grant's stomach turned to lead. He stole a glance at the gas station window. The woman was still standing there, gripping her phone in both hands, watching, recording maybe. The world felt too big all of a sudden, too much, too exposed. Marcus sighed, rubbing his jaw for a moment before turning toward his car. He didn't need to say anything else. The lesson had already been delivered. We're done here, he said, voice steady. And just like that, it was over. No sirens, no arrests. No last-minute power plays. Just a man leaving a gas station, and a cop left standing in the wreckage of his own failure. Officer Grant stood frozen, watching as Marcus Carter's taillights disappeared into the night. The SUVs lingered a moment longer, almost like they were giving him time to absorb the weight of what had just happened. Then, with eerie smoothness, they pulled out of the gas station and vanished into the darkness. But for Grant, it wasn't over. His pulse still pounded in his ears. His hands felt clammy despite the cool night air. The authority he had wrapped himself in just minutes ago, the badge, the uniform, the power, felt hollow now, worthless. Because the moment real power had arrived, his own had crumbled to dust. The gas station was still. The woman at the window turned away, slipping back inside. The man in the car shook his head before driving off. Even the cashier behind the counter, who had watched with quiet dread, disappeared into the aisles. Nobody said a word. Nobody needed to. They had all seen him exposed, not by force, not by violence, but by something worse: accountability. Would he have arrested Marcus if those SUVs hadn't shown up? Would he have justified it later? Called it resisting? Grant didn't know. And that was the worst part. He turned to his cruiser, hand on the door handle, but something stopped him, his reflection in the window. For the first time, he didn't like what he saw. In 2025, this story isn't just an isolated incident. It's a reflection of a larger truth. The power dynamics at that gas station weren't just about one man and one cop. They were about a system that too often assumes authority without question, and the rare moments when it is forced to face itself. Marcus Carter walked away that night not because of luck, but because he had protection, something too many others don't. The question remains: what happens to those who don't have SUVs pulling up in their defense? What happens to the people no one is watching? Marcus Carter didn't just challenge an officer, he exposed a broken system. But change doesn't happen in silence. If you believe in justice, in holding power accountable, then speak up. Support leaders like Marcus, demand accountability, and share this story. What would you say to Marcus after this moment? What should his next step be? Drop a comment below and be part of the conversation.